Let's start off by bending some sides. Sides are also known as rims to some people. I would say if you were contemplating building a guitar, bending the sides into shape would probably be one of the more daunting steps along the way. Over the years, a number of different methods have been devised for this task. The simplest and most ancient would be bending them over a heated pipe. Here's my electrical version. Originally, and we're talking like 17th, 18th century, it would have been heated with charcoal. Later on, we started using a propane torch or an electric element for the purpose. There are plenty of luthiers who still do that. And there is a bit of a learning curve. You can expect to break some sides while getting the hang of it, which can be pretty frustrating. And if you're not doing it continuously, you tend to get a bit rusty and out of practice. One of the first guitar building guides, at least in English, was written by Irving Sloane in the 60s, and he suggested a method of simmering the wood in hot water and clamping it into a form. I'm not sure how many people actually did that, because it involved finding your local tinsmith to make you a purpose-built trough long enough for the sides and everything. And then after boiling the things, it takes quite a while for them to dry out to the point where you could go ahead and start working with them in the instrument. Other people have suggested using steam, as there's a long history of bending larger dimension wood for things like boat building or furniture. And it can be done. The thing is, we're pretty exacting about the shape of a guitar, and this stock is so thin that it cools off pretty quickly when it's been steamed. And to get it clamped up properly, unless you've got some super engineered hydraulic mold, it's a real challenge. So most of us use some kind of electrically heated bending form. Long ago now, I purchased this silicone heating blanket from a now defunct source, and I can make patterns for various instruments, use the same heater, and the risk of breaking a side, though it still exists, is much less likely now than when I was bending everything by hand. This form is, well, you could call it a solid form. It's made of MDF, and I took the end piece, cut the shape I wanted, and then stacked subsequent pieces on it. Used a pattern trimming bearing guided router bit to transfer the shape all the way along. And I say solid, but the interior ones are actually cut away to a great extent so it doesn't weigh 80 pounds. There are other designs where people will make the two outside halves and fill in with pieces of round steel bar or something and then put a piece of metal over that. I just like the solid forms. This thing is also slightly exaggerated in its curves. They're a bit tighter than the actual shape of the guitar to account for some spring back that happens. In my case, I get the thing hot enough to bend it, let it cool off, bring it back up to temperature again, which is usually somewhere around 250 degrees Fahrenheit, about 120 Celsius. Then I'll remove the side while it's still hot and then clamp it into my mold, which is the actual outside shape of the guitar. As it cools down, it holds that shape pretty well. Now there are more advanced versions of this kind of mold where you have integral screws, etc., designed by people like Charles Fox, who is the one who really brought this into the realm of kind of a home-based luthier. But this is as simple as I can make it. You know, it just uses a couple of clamps. I've got this shaped caul that presses down in the area of the waist, and it was economical. So I've got my sides scraped and sanded to thickness, and I've marked the end, which is going to be the tail end, and also the side that is going to contact the soundboard, which is kind of important. It's not hard to get these things reversed, which it's not the end of the world, but usually we want stuff to be symmetrical in the guitar. In terms of thickness, I usually go to about 2 millimeters, about 80 thousandths of an inch. If you're bending by hand, you might want to go thinner than that, maybe 70 thousandths. To prepare, I'll wrap the side in baking parchment, which in the case of a highly resinous wood like rosewood, where that resin tends to bubble out, it will keep the mold clean. And certain other materials, maple being one of them, There's a propensity for them to stain. If you put them in contact with steel or iron, you get a blue stain, and this sort of just keeps them away from that. I don't wet the wood very much. Little spritz. That's all that's necessary. There's no need to soak it for half an hour. And then during the bend, I'll actually surround it with this metal, thin pieces of, in this case, aluminum flashing from the hardware store. Inexpensive stuff. And this provides some support on both sides of the wood where the fibers, when they're in tension or compression, tend to want to split open like this, which is a real danger, especially with curly maple. The better material would probably be like a 30 gauge spring steel sheet, which they're much more expensive. It's got to be thin, like really floppy. 0.2 millimeters, 10 or 12 thousandths. If it's thicker than that, it just doesn't want to conform to the curves very easily. And to be honest, this is not always necessary, but it does help. It's like insurance, so I use it. I get the side sandwich clamped to the base end of the form and let the heat blanket come up to temperature. They get hot pretty fast. I'll start to raise the blanket up in contact with the sheet of metal and get the lower bout preheated. That's another nice thing about the metal. It transmits heat farther along the side over a greater area. That makes the bending go quickly. Then I use a flat piece of plywood to press the side against the form. It's already too hot to touch, so I got the glove on. As I near the waist, I'll switch over to the contoured form. That has some cork sheet glued to the base of it so that it's slightly compressible. And if my position is off a millimeter or two, it won't affect anything. It'll conform to the shape of the mold. Then I'll use a couple of F-clamps to cinch the waist in tight. The upper bout bends in the same way, and then it too gets clamped up. I'll turn off the heat for about 20 minutes, let it cool down, then I'll turn it back on for about 10 to bring it back up to temperature. That seems to help set the bend better. It takes me about 45 minutes to bend one side, but I'm in no hurry. The side comes off the form when it's still extremely hot, so I work fast. The waist area is really the only thing to be concerned about. I want to get that into position and clamped to the mold using plywood C-clamps that I made for this purpose. I'll transfer the center line of the mold onto the side. I'll mark it with my scalpel too, and I'll saw it out with the back saw. I've got a scrap piece of veneer under the side to protect the surface of the mold. While the heating form is out, I'll make sure to remember to bend the binding too. It's easy when they're all taped to each other like this. I just lightly dampen the waist area. I have a little radius sanding block that matches the curve at the tail end of my mold, and here I'm sanding the surface of the tail block to shape. That way when I glue the blocks to the sides, it conforms to the shape very nicely. I cut and planed some strips of mahogany to make kerfed linings. I favor the so-called reverse kerf, which is essentially rectangular in section, but I like to round over the upper edge with a radius bit. Cutting the kerfs into the lining, it's a fun job. I do this on a bandsaw with a jig that registers against a stop, so the web of material that's left is about 0.5 millimeter, 20 thousandths. Maybe don't do it in an unheated shed when it's -7. I was really testing the genetic resilience of my Canadian hands here, but at a certain point the ghosts of my ancestors were howling at me to put on some gloves. I'm going to use the big radius sanding dish to sand the radius into the rim set and the end blocks. Kerfed lining should scare you a little bit when you're handling it. If it doesn't, then you probably left it too thick. I glue that in using these little spring clamps, plastic ones from the dollar store. And this is about where we're going to leave it, folks. Short week for me because I took some time off, and it seems like I'm coming down with a terrible cold. And I just kind of want to lie in bed and or watch The Lord of the Rings. I don't know. Happy New Year.